Today's session is going to focus primarily on passwordless capabilities of OIE. If we move to the next slide, please. So my name is Brent Arrington. I'm a member of the product acceleration team here at Okta, primarily focusing on OIE. I'm happy to be joined today by my colleague, Dmitry Volkman, who is from our product marketing team. He's also focused primarily on OIE. Dmitry and I will be leading today's presentation. In addition, we're joined by a couple of other of my colleagues from the product acceleration team who are OIE experts. And they're going to be monitoring the Q&A section of the webinar as we go through the content here and answering questions in real time. As I mentioned, we do have a fair amount of content to get through. So as you have questions, please use the Q&A functionality in the webinar to post your questions there. It will answer those in real time. If we have time at the end of the presentation, we'll take a few moments to answer some live questions there as well. But please don't hesitate. Go ahead and use that Q&A section. Let's move to the next slide. So before we get started, here's the ubiquitous safe harbor disclaimer. This presentation does contain forward-looking statements, so we'll throw this out there just for the typical waiver there. Let's move to the next slide, please. So in today's presentation, we're going to guide you through a journey from Okta Classic through the self-service upgrade process to ultimately configuring a passwordless experience in OIE. Now, we're going to start with a very simple Okta Classic tenant. We're going to review some of the key new OIE concepts. We'll then actually walk through the upgrade process from Classic to OIE using our self-service upgrade tooling. We'll review the before and after state so that you see some of the changes that you can look for in OIE after you upgrade. And then finally, we're going to walk you through setting up a passwordless experience in a couple different ways, one using Email Magic Leak and the other using Okta FastPass. Next slide, please. So before we begin, you may be asking yourself, well, why bother? Why are we going passwordless in the first place? Well, first of all, passwords can be extremely insecure. If left to their own devices, many users will use passwords that are far too simple or are reused across multiple sites and applications. And no matter how strong a password is, it's always vulnerable to a phishing attack. If, as an admin, you take steps to try to mitigate some of those vulnerabilities by requiring complex passwords, you can create a poor end user experience. The more complex a password is, the easier it is to forget, the more likely it is to be reused across different sites, and the more likely it's going to result in forgot password reset request, which of course leads to higher costs. Not only in the password reset flow itself, but also the productivity that's lost by end users who are blocked by being blocked out. Next slide, please. So now that we've seen why we should move away from passwords, how can Okta help make that move away from passwords a reality? Well, this is where Okta Identity Engine comes in. This is a completely free, full platform upgrade that delivers both enhanced security and improved user experiences. Among other things, OIE can accelerate the implementation of passwordless flows, which is going to be the focus of today's presentation, zero trust use cases, and all the while it provides greater flexibility and scalability for creating secure identity flows. These use cases are supported by a number of different OIE features. Here's just a few. The phishing-resistant strong authenticators, specifically FastPass, which we'll look at extensively today, advanced device context capabilities, policies that support assurance levels and app-level policies, enrollment policies that allow for no password or optional password users, flexible account recovery flows, customization and branding improvements, including additional developer resources. And coming soon, we'll have desktop MFA or MFA for actual desktop logins through a product called Okta Device Access. That's actually in an early beta phase at the moment. It'll be more broadly available in the very near future. All this new innovation is available once you upgrade to OIE. So with that, now I'll turn it over to Dmitry for a quick review of some of the fundamental differences between Okta Classic and OIE.
Hello, everyone. So this is Dmitry, and it is now my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar meetup. and illustrate some aspect of our journey from Okta Classic to passwordless. Now, OIE, our latest upgrade, brings new concept, a new authentication pipeline, a new policy framework, and much more. Yet OIE is a proven solution. All our customers since March 2022 runs on OIE, and there are more than 6,000 of them. So it is a proven upgrade. Let's look at some of the key concepts that OIE brings that are a little bit different from what you're familiar with Okta Classic. The first one I want to talk about is the concept of authenticators. Authenticators are what the end user will use to identify, and authenticators have several authentication methods of different factor types. To better understand what they are, let me just give you a few simple examples here. The first one, and probably the most obvious one, is password. Password is a secret string of characters, obviously, and it's a knowledge factor type. This is something that the user knows. This is something that you know. A phone is another type of authenticators. It is of a possession factor type because you own a phone. Now, a phone also has another characteristic, which is that it has several authentication methods. You can use SMS, or you can use a voice call to authenticate. Finally, and these are probably the most sophisticated, interesting one, they are authenticators in forms of application, typically Google Authenticator or Okta Verify, our flagship product. Those apps can actually be very sophisticated in the sense that they're fundamentally possession factor type because you own this application on one other device. But with the addition of biometric, they can also be of inherence factor type. So something that you are, not only something that you own. We can even go further when implementing cryptographic secrets on those devices and have additional factor type that are actually fairly similar to knowledge type when this cryptographic secret is bounded to the device. So we use this vocabulary of authenticators as opposed to a simple multi-factor in OIE. The second very important concept in OIE is the policy framework. In Okta Classic, you have a password policy, related sign-on, and apps that also have sign-on policies. OIE strengthens this logic or this approach and allows for a sophisticated app-level policy. Now, if you look on the left, in OIE, all users first go through the global session policy, which to some extent acts as a gateway. As you can see, you have the similar parameters that you would have in classic authentication, which is requiring a password or requiring authenticator sequencing. So this is the same thing in classic. What you have in OIE that is different is you have the ability to actually transfer or delegate the authentication at the application level, which is what is selected here. Now let's look at an application level policy or authentication policy in OIE. So in this example, you see that in the user must authenticate with, you actually do not specify a specific authenticator or specific sequence of factors. You actually specify the outcome what you want. In our example, we want password plus another factor. Now you have a choice of different assurance level that you may require at this level, any one factor type, a possession factor, any two factor types. So you specify at a fairly abstract level, and OIE will actually automatically figure out which of the authenticators that you have provisioned in your organization will be prompted to the end user. So it is a more abstract approach based on assurance level, which we believe is easier to manage and much more powerful. Now, the third concept I want to talk about briefly here is the concept of device assurance and device context. Some of you are familiar with device trust in Okta, and the objective is to get you as much information as possible as the context so that you can determine which authentication assurance is required for a specific device. So there are three dimensions that you can put together to create a very rich device context in OIE. The first one on the left is you can create a device assurance policy that will have a specific OS requirements as well as additional attributes such as the device must have a lock screen, the device must have a secure enclave or a disk encryption. So you create these policies, these device assurance policies, and then you can attach them to an app level policy. The second aspect of device context in the center is the integration with device management tools as well as security tools. So if you connect to those third-party solutions, you can capture the signals and make those signals available when you create your policy. Finally, the third dimension is Okta as a concept of device state when used with authenticators like Okta Verify. To simplify, a device can be known, registered, or managed. Known is obvious, and it means that we've seen that device before. Registered means that the device has Okta Verify running on it, and there's a cryptographic binding that has been done between the device and the end user. Manage means that we go one step further by using certificates for this cryptographic binding, and we also leverage the secure element on the device if it's present. So in the end, on the left side of this slide, you can see that we can use the state of the device, the fact that the device is managed or not, as well as insurance policy to craft very sophisticated policy here. So that's just a brief overview of device context. We are not going to go too much into detail into this specific webinar, but at least that should give you a sense of the capabilities here. So finally, to wrap up our overview of the differences or the new concept in OIE, it's really, when you put it all together, it's about assurance level. So let's look at a way to do that. So a common way to leverage OIE is to create buckets with different assurance level based on the sensitivity of your apps. One key aspect is that authentication policies can be applied to one or several apps. So you can create those buckets and have one policy for each, and then apply them to a number of applications. So here is an example of a model. It is not by any means a reference architecture. You would have to tweak it to your specific needs. But in this example, if you look on the left, the low assurance, which we will keep for very simple non-critical applications such as the dashboard or lunch selection, for example, this one could be executed from any device and will require any one type factor. And examples would be a password or an OTP through an SMS or a push notification. When we move to medium assurance for applications such as collaboration or business apps, we will require a registered device, and then we'll require a combination of factor, a possession factor type and a knowledge factor type. And this could be implemented by a password and a push notification on your device. Finally, for the highest assurance for financial apps or IP-related applications, you would require the device to be not only registered, but also managed. And here we will require inherence, which is a biometric, and either a possession or a knowledge factor type. And in this case, this is where you would use authenticators like a WebAuthn with the biometrics, or our leading authenticator flagship FastPass with biometric. So these are some of the key concepts that are important to understand when upgrading to OIE. Now, we mentioned that there are many other features, and you have a complete list here. Brent mentioned a few of them, like device context that we just seen, app level policy, phishing resistance. But I will also highlight that from an administrator standpoint, the improvements in the management SDK and the Terraform support are probably things you want to look out. It really helps from a scalability standpoint. Now, before we can benefit from all these features, we need to upgrade the organization. So I am going to, Brent is going to show us how this upgrade process goes. So Brent, back to you.
All right, thanks, Dimitri. Yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on all these new features. So let's do it. Let's upgrade. Let's move to the next slide, please. I do want to call out before we jump into this, some key resources that are available to you related to OIE. And I'd ask that my panelist colleagues throw these links in the chat window so that you can grab these and bookmark them for later. One is a link to the OIE Upgrade Hub in the Okta Help Center. This is your sort of one-stop shop for all documentation related to OIE features and functionality, as well as the upgrade process itself. And then in addition to that, I'd love for you to take some time after the session today to request membership to the Okta Identity Engine and Office Hours discussion group in the Okta community site. From this group, you'll be able to post questions that you may have around OIE or upgrade related questions directly to the forum, and also register for live office hour sessions with our OIE experts if you have additional questions as well. So please take note of those links for future reference. Next slide, please. So what is the self-service upgrade tooling? So in a nutshell, it's an app or a mini app within your Okta admin console that allows you to self-service schedule your org for upgrade, as well as potentially remediating any issues that need to be resolved prior to the upgrade. There are essentially two steps in the process. One is to check your tenant for eligibility, for upgrade eligibility, and potentially complete any necessary action items. And then secondly, pick your date and time. Next slide, please. It's important to note that in order to take advantage of this, you do need to log in as a super admin. Only super admins will see this capability in your admin console. So if all of you are following security best practices, as I know you are, this upgrade capability is only going to be limited to a very select few, very trusted admins. So that should be reassuring to you. Also, there is no upgrade now option where you would immediately upgrade your org. This is all operating on a scheduled basis, and you can schedule your upgrade anywhere from a minimum of 2 hours into the future up to 30 days into the future. So there's no such thing as an accidental upgrade. You're always going to be scheduling with at least a minimum of a 2-hour buffer. And lastly, once you do schedule your org for upgrade, the admins within your tenant will all receive email notifications indicating that an upgrade has been scheduled and the date and time of that upgrade. If for any reason you needed to push that date out, change the date, or even cancel the upgrade altogether, you have time to do that. Next slide, please. So first step in the process is checking your org's eligibility for upgrade. To do that, you just click the Get Started button. Next slide, please. If your org has any configuration issues that require config changes, or if it has any items that require acknowledgement, just a warning that requires you to acknowledge that potential issue, all those things will appear here, along with links to corresponding documentation about each specific item. Now, I do want to point out that this screenshot is somewhat forward-looking in the sense that currently in production, the orgs that have actual config issues that need to be remediated would not see this tooling at all yet. That's coming. That will be available to those orgs in later in August. At the moment, you would only see this tooling if your org is completely free and clear and eligible to upgrade, or if you only have items that require an acknowledgement of a warning. But in either case, you would see something like this screen here. Next slide, please. For the configuration items, as you remediate those issues, you'll notice that they become highlighted in green with a green check mark here to indicate that those issues have been resolved and are no longer blocking you from upgrading. Next slide. Similarly, for those items that require acknowledgement, once you provide your acknowledgement of that warning, that will be noted here, and it will no longer be a blocker for you to proceeding with your upgrade. These are things that are not necessarily changes that are required. These are just things based on our prior experience with upgrades that you may want to investigate further and just make sure that your org won't have any issues prior to upgrading. Next slide, please. Once you've acknowledged all the warnings and remediated all of the config changes that need to be done, you're now going to be presented with an option of choosing a date and time for your upgrade. You simply pick a date, pick a time that you want. This will be presented to you in your localized time zone. So you simply pick a date and time, and you're all set. Next slide, please. Again, once your date and time is picked, you'll see that highlighted here in green. If for some reason, as I said, if you need to come back and change that, you can do that from the admin console as well. The banner will have a link for you to go and reschedule that time. Next slide. In addition, if for some reason something were to change between the time that you initially scheduled your upgrade and the time that the upgrade actually happens, the upgrade tooling will let you know that as well. So as an example, if a configuration change that you remediated in order to clear your path to upgrade was somehow reverted between the time you scheduled and the time the upgrade happened, or if some new configuration was introduced that would block you from upgrading, the tool will let you know that, and you can contact support and to understand exactly what the issue is, how to remediate it, and how to get your org rescheduled again. Your upgrade will not proceed if there are any things that are introduced between the initial scheduling and the time of the upgrade that would be problematic. So you don't have to worry about any of that. Next slide, please. Finally, once you're all done, you will get a big banner at the top of your admin console that lets you know that your upgrade has been completed. You also will get confirmation emails for all your admins to let them know that the upgrade has been completed and you're all done. So now that we've gone through the upgrade process, I want to hand it back over to Dimitri to walk us through how this actually will work in action.
Great, Brian. Thank you. So as you can see on this slide, we have created a very simple org. We've actually created two versions of this org, so we cloned it. It has a default password policy and a group of users, advanced users, which are prompt for MFA upfront, and the other normal users are not prompt for MFA upfront. Two users, James and Nancy, and two applications. You will see that those applications are extremely simple. They are bookmark apps, and they require multi-factor for all users. So let's have a quick look at how it is in the product itself. So as you can see here, and by the way, I saw a question in the chat that yes, this definitely works on Okta Preview organization. We are using Okta Preview organizations here. So in my first organization called One, this is the one that has been upgraded to OIE. You can actually see that the upgrade has been completed. And the second one, the 2, is the clone. And actually, I'm going to re-authenticate a version of that same organization in the classic states. So here I'm authenticating to this organization. And let me go to the admin version, which is going to give me a push notification on my phone. So I'm not going to show you my phone, but I believe you trust me on this one. It's coming. Here we go. So now, because this organization is still in Okta Classic, you can see that I actually have the banner that proposed me to schedule my upgrade. So let's review briefly. As I said, we go into directory. We have people here. We have two users, Nancy and James, press administrators. We have our two groups, which are my advanced users and my normal users. So nothing extremely fancy here. If we look at the security menu choice, you see that in authentication, I do have the default password policy, and I do have a sign-on for advanced user here. And in multi-factor, I have a number of options here, like Okta Verify, SMS authentication, voice call. So nothing really complicated here. Let's see how that materializes in OIE now, once you've upgraded this organization. So if I switch to the OIE dashboard, now if I open directory, you're not going to see a lot of change here. There is a device concept here where we can see the devices that have been registered. If we have time at the end of the demo, we'll have a quick look about that. People are the same, so you're going to find the same people here. There's actually an extra one that was created for test, but we can ignore this guy. And we have a group setup as well, where we have my two groups that were upgraded when moving to OIE. Now, if I go in security, this is where you're going to start seeing changes. First, you don't see authentication and multi-factor, but you will see authenticators, as we discussed in the concept. You'll see the global session policy, and you will see authentication policies. And by the way, just a quick parenthesis, on the device side, you can see the device assurance and the device integration here, which again, we will not cover in detail, but this is where they materialize. So authenticators, we talked about it earlier, so I'm not going to say it again. You see the list of the different authenticators with their factor types and their characteristics, and you can obviously add authenticators. We support things like RSA Secure ID, smart cards, so all those kind of things that you can add to your organization. First new concept is the global session policy. So when you migrate, you see that a global session policy was created for the advanced users. And if I look at this policy detail, I'm going to see that the upgraded rule actually reflects what we had in Okta Classic. So you will see the familiar either password or authenticator sequence. But you will also see that now there's the new choice where I can check this box or tick this box, and I will delegate the authentication to the application level policy. Now, should that be the case, I can now look at the authentication policy. If I look at the authentication policy, there are three I want to show you here. The first application, which is my bookmark to Wikipedia, I can see a rule that was created to reflect the sign-on policy we had in Okta Classic. Pretty simple here. And the same thing for our second application, the Business Insider app, which also has a rule created. The last thing I want to show you, because this will have some importance when we look at the demo, if I go into application and check the Okta dashboard and look at the sign-on policy that is applied to the Okta dashboard, you will see that by default, OIE has created a classic migrated rule. And if I look at this rule is going to enforce the password because the entry point on Okta Classic is the password. So if you are updating your org, after you upgrade your org, if you want to implement passwordless OIE, we are going to have to modify this rule as well. So that's the brief overview I wanted to give you of the before and after scenario when you upgrade your organization to OIE. Now, now that we have upgraded our org and look at the before after, how do we go passwordless? Let's dive in. So first, you are going to address a few challenges. We must provide an appropriate level of security. As limited as passwords are, a strong password is still a secure option if handled properly. And by eliminating password, you eliminate a factor type, the knowledge factor type. And true MFA still requires true different factor types. So as a result, true MFA will require that you craft policies based on possession and inheritance factor type. And I usually used to say that in passwordless world, biometrics are usually your dear friends. So we will have to look into that. So what are the options to implement passwordless? And this is not by far a complete overview, but these are the most common options. And you can see that I have actually sorted those common options into three different buckets. So a low assurance one where you only leverage a possession factor type, and usually you would do this on any device. And the options we have here are the email magic link, which we're going to talk about a little later, and the SMS, receiving an SMS with a code or a phone one-time password. If you want to go to the next level, you will actually look more at a possession factor type, but on a registered device. And this is where you would use authenticators like WebAuthn, Okta Verified Push, or FastPass without biometric. For the ultimate assurance level, you will actually require the combination of a possession factor type and a biometric factor type. You might also want to consider registered and managed device, so devices for which you can capture the device management signals. And in this case, examples of authenticators you might use would be WebAuthn with biometric, or again, our FastPass with biometric. So these are some of the common options to go passwordless. There are more, but these are some of the most common ones that we see nowadays. Now, let's dive into a couple of these options. The first one, which we want to briefly have a look at, is the email magic link. Now, email magic link is mostly used for custom apps and usually customer-facing app, where you want a very simple solution and with a minimum friction. Now, note that this is considered a low assurance authentication mechanism because it solely relies on the security of your email infrastructure. And that can be a challenge. Now, for enterprise use cases, we'll be looking at Okta FastPass, which is an enterprise-grade solution, phishing resistant. Brent is going to cover that in a moment. And when combined with advanced, with device context, it can provide actually the highest level of assurance. So that's the preferred choice probably here. Let's have a quick look into Email Magic Link. Now, I am not going to do a complete demonstration or implementation on Email Magic Link. Just want to give you a sense of what it is. So it is a point-and-click user experience, useful for non-frequent access registration or first-time logging. And it also supports a multi-device scenario. So you could access an application on your PC and use the Magic Link on your phone with your email if you want. Let me show you rapidly how the user interface, user experience will be for an Email Magic Link. So upon trying to access an application, here you have a widget where you're going to put your username and click Next. In the next prompt, you will be asked if you want to verify with your email. So you will request, send me an email. The system will confirm that the email has been sent. Going into your email, you will open the email and you see that you have two options. You can sign in directly by clicking on the button, or you can copy the code and type in the code into the widget. So if you click on the sign in, well, you'll be see a pop-up saying sign you to application, and you will be authenticated to the application. So pretty straightforward, again, point and click user experience. Now, how do you implement that from an administrator standpoint? Again, I'm not going to do it live in our organization. We will update our organization for FastPass later on. But in a nutshell, if you follow these steps, obviously you probably want to create a group for the Email Magic Link user. Then you want to create an enrollment policy that requires email, and you can even put password optional in this case, or disable, which is usually the case for Email Magic Link scenario. You will create a global sign-on policy for this group that delegates to the app level. And then you will create an authentication policy to be applied at the app level, where you will require a possession factor type, because email is a possession factor. Make sure that there is a box in the policy that actually allows you to exclude email and phone authenticators, which is obviously for enterprise use cases. So make sure that this is not checked. And then you can, as I showed you, verify that the authenticators that satisfy these requirements, that email will appear in the list for the policy. So this is a brief overview of what are the different scenarios you can go after for passwordless, and a little dive into Email Magic Link. Now we're going to focus the rest of this webinar meetup on FastPass. And I'm going to have Brent do first an overview of what is FastPass and how it works, and then I will come back to make a demonstration. Brent, back to you.
All right, thanks, Dimitri. So now let's take a look at another passwordless flow, this time one with enterprise-grade security, including phishing resistance using Okta FastPass. Let's move to the next slide, please. So the fact that we're all on this call, I think we can probably all agree that phishing is a big problem to deal with. But just for giggles, I'll throw out a couple of stats here to reiterate that fact. So according to a study by Interisle, in 2022, phishing attacks rose by 61%. And in just the first quarter of 2022 alone, there were more than 1 million reported phishing attacks. That's only the reported attacks. Next slide, please. So what is Okta's solution to this? Well, this is where FastPass comes into play. FastPass is an authentication method that enables secure passwordless and phishing-resistant authentication flows into any app that you need on any device from any location. A simple flag will let you enforce the use of phishing-resistant flows on Okta FastPass for authentication flows for applications that are highly sensitive. So from a customer standpoint, this means that for your high assurance applications, you can eliminate the ability to use phishing vulnerable factors such as SMS or push notifications, et cetera, for authentication for those sensitive flows. If we take a look at some of the NIST guidelines around strong phishing resistant MFA, it notes that these authenticators should have cryptographic binding between the authenticator and the user identity, that there should be no shared secrets at all in the flow, such as passwords or secret questions. There should be origin binding and channel binding in the flow, and there should be high assurance and proof of possession during the flow. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at how Okta addresses some of these. So before using FastPass for authentication, we need to enroll our device in Okta FastPass. Now, there are multiple ways to do this, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to focus on a use case where our end user, Dimitri in this case, has received a laptop from the company he's just joined, and he will need to either install the Okta Verify app, or it may have been already pre-installed by his employer, and then he'll need to initiate the FastPass enrollment process. Now, to do this, he simply will be asked to authenticate against his company's Okta tenant with other factors that have already been configured, such as a password, email magic link, or SMS OTP that's been pre-configured by his administrators. After the initial authentication, Dimitri can complete the enrollment by providing his biometrics from his device, such as Face ID or fingerprint scan, and then Dimitri is all set. Now, on the back end, FastPass creates a cryptographic key pair. It stores the private key securely in the device's TPM, and then it sends the public keys to the Okta backend. Okta's backend stores this information and the public key to complete the enrollment. Now, let's see how this addresses or satisfies some of the NIST guidelines that we mentioned earlier. So first off, FastPass is generating a strong public-private key pair using either ES256 or RS256 cryptographic algorithms backed by the user's biometrics. So this checks off the cryptographic binding between authenticator and user identity. Additionally, the private key that's generated by FastPass never leaves the device. So this satisfies the high assurance and proof of possession requirement. Next slide, please. Now that we've enrolled, let's see how the authentication flow works with Okta FastPass. Now, FastPass, again, has multiple methods to authenticate depending on the operating system, browser, or native app. But for today, let's focus on one of the primary methods, which is the loopback server method. In this method, FastPass uses runs as an HTTP server on a local port, listening for authentication requests. This diagram shows the flow of this authentication model. So having enrolled in FastPass, the first thing Dimitri wants to do is to log into his email account. Since Gmail has been configured to be managed by Okta, it's going to redirect the browser to Okta for authentication. Okta loads the browser with the Okta sign-in widget. Along with the sign-in widget, Okta sends a unique identifier called a nonce that will be used during this authentication flow. The sign-in widget then invokes the local FastPass server, the FastPass local server. FastPass will initiate the authentication request and begin polling the Okta backend for data. FastPass is going to prompt the user for biometrics. It will take the nonce that was sent by Okta in the previous step and build a response payload back. In that payload, FastPass is going to include the origin domain from the originating request and the device posture signals from the device itself. It's going to sign this response with the private key and send it to Okta. Now, the origin domain being included here is an important part of this because this is what helps Okta detect adversaries in the middle during phishing attacks. Once received, Okta is going to use the private key to verify the signed payload and then perform a policy evaluation on that payload. If the user and the device both meet the policy criteria, then Okta will respond with either a SAML assertion or an access token for the downstream application. It'll then send the browser back to the application, in this case, Gmail, to complete the authentication flow. Now, this method is highly secure and it's highly resistant to credential phishing attacks. And additionally, if you combine this with third-party integrations such as CrowdStrike or Tanium, you can include additional device signal information in the payload that FastPass sends to Okta for even stronger security against attack vectors such as malware and ransomware attacks. Now, revisiting the NIST guidelines from earlier, we can see that we check off a couple of other boxes with this flow. So number one, there are no shared secrets such as passwords at all in this authentication flow. Hence, we check that box off. And as you can see in step 4, FastPass sends the origin domain from the browser, as mentioned earlier, and it signs this with the biometric enabled private key so that it can't be tampered with before sending it to the Okta backend. So that checks off the last item, which is origin and channel binding. And now I'll turn it back over to Dimitri to show you how all this works in real life.
Great, Brett. Thank you. So yeah, it's now time to leverage OIE in our upgraded org. So for our passwordless scenario, we are going to implement a very simple 2-bucket assurance level here. So on the first level, which we call low assurance, we are going to require any one factor, any device, and this is going to be used to give us access to the dashboard app and to our first application. For our second application, we're going to require higher assurance, which is going to be any two factors on the registered device, and we will see that we'll implement true MFA as well here. Now, the way you do that is on the checklist here. So this checklist is here for reference. We will make the deck available. So I'm going to jump into the product itself, and we're going to look at the demo right now. So let me quit the slide mode. So I'm going to go back to my OIE upgraded org here. That you've seen earlier. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to show you the existing user experience. So I'm going to switch to my end user browser, so which is the this one. You can see that it's a green. It has a green background. It indicates that this is my end user. So I'm going to use Nancy here. So Nancy is going to connect to our org using password and a push notification. So not showing you my phone this time again, but hope you trust me on that. And upon clicking on accepting the push notification, Nancy is connected and Nancy has access to the two applications here. So that's the current experience with a password and a push notification. So I'm going to sign out, go to my organization, and get going into implementing passwordless with FastPass. So the first thing I want to do, I want to go into directory and create a group for passwordless user. So I'm going to call it PWD less users, and it's going to be passwordless. So the group is created. Now, before we move Nancy to this group, let's look at what needs to be done to implement FastPass. So if you first thing to do is go into security, authenticators, and actually, we're not going to enroll new users, but if you are obviously implementing a passwordless solution, authentication and approach, you probably want to create a specific policy to enroll passwordless user. And in this policy, you might want to make email required. You definitely want to make Okta Verify required, and you could maybe make email password optional here, and maybe require the phone as well. So you will create a policy which you will be assigned to your group. There we go. And you would obviously add a basic rule, and I'm going to put just the default here. So that's the normal policy that will be used for new users going on passwordless experience. Now, what I have to do back in authenticators is I have to look at Okta Verify and open it. As we have mentioned earlier, FastPass is actually a characteristic or an attribute or a functionality, if you want, of Okta Verify. So I'm going to turn on Okta FastPass here. And in the widget that you will be presented to authenticate, you can actually decide to show or not a FastPass button. So we're going to start with that so we can make it visible. This is mostly do that if you want to roll out FastPass progressively, you can actually hide the button, so the other users will not see it. Only the one that are on the passwordless will see this experience. So I'm going to save that here. So I've set up my authenticators, I've prepared my group. Now, the first thing is to create a global policy for my new passwordless users. So I'm going to say for my passwordless users, I'm going to create a new policy, passwordless, and I'm going to assign it to the passwordless group. And this is where we're going to be using the OIE magic. We are not going to require a password or an authenticator sequence. We are going to delegate to the application level, and we're not going to require MFA here. We will handle that at the level of the application as well. So I've created the, okay, I need a description, I need a rule name. That's going to be better. Here we go. I'm going to make sure that this rule is actually evaluated in the right order here. So I've created my global policy. Now I need to go into authentication policy and look at my two applications first and create rules for this new passwordless experience as well. So going into Wikipedia here, my rules, I'm going to add a rule. which I'm going to call passwordless users. And for this low assurance level, I'm going to require any one-factor type, and I'm actually not going to require biometrics here, because when I use FastPass, as we said, it's a possession factor first, so I don't need the biometrics for the low-level assurance, so I'm not going to require it here. So the rule is created. Same thing, make sure that the rule is at the right priority level. Now, for our second application, which is Business Insider, we're going to add a rule as well, and we're going to make this rule a little more higher in terms of assurance level. So we're going to call it passwordless users. We are going to apply that rule to the passwordless group, which I think I forgot to do in the previous one. So we'll go back to it. And here we are going to ask for any two factors, and we will require biometric for this one. So let's save that rule. Move passwordless up. And sorry, there we go. And let me go back to my policy here, because I think that I forgot to put it for the right group. Let's include so passwordless user. So it applies to our passwordless users. There we go. Now, if you remember in the introduction or the before-after scenario, I showed you about Okta dashboard. So we need to double check what's happening for the Okta dashboard. So let's look at application here and move to our Okta dashboard. Now you can see that there's a sign on, and here I can see which rule is associated to the Okta dashboard. And we can see that it is the classic migrated policy, which, if you remember, actually requires a password. So if we keep it this way, obviously we're going to be prompted for a password. So we are going to change this rule for Okta password. Sorry, I'm going to edit, and we're going to select a different policy. We are going to apply the one-factor access policy, so we can have a seamless access with Okta FastPass. So I think we've done pretty much everything we needed to do. The last thing we have to do is go into directory, go into our people, select Nancy here, and we are going to add Nancy to our passwordless group, passwordless user. There we go. I'm going to actually remove her from this other group. So I should be done from an Okta admin standpoint. So I'm going to shoot back to my user interface. So if I reload here, you can see that I now have sign in with FastPass active. Now I'm not completely done on the end user side, because I do already have Okta Verify installed in this PC machine, because this is my work computer. I do not have it provisioned for this organization. So we are going to open Okta Verify. If it's the first time user, you're probably going to have to download Okta Verify either through an MDM solution or through the App Store. It's obviously available in the App Store. So we are not going to do that because it's already here. So I'm going to open Okta Verify. I'm going to grab the URL of my organization here. Here we go. Go into Okta Verify, add an account, put the URL. I'm going to go next here. So it's going to prompt me to authenticate. So now I'm still in the password world. So authenticating here, putting my password, and getting the push notification. Let me grab my phone. Here we go. Now I'm authenticated. I'm being prompted to activate biometrics. So I'm going to go next, enable Touch ID. Touch ID is enabled. And now I do have Okta Verified set up with my account to my org. So if I go back now to my end user interface and reload, I can actually say sign in with FastPass, and I'm granted access to my dashboard. Now, for my first level app, Wikipedia, I can just click on it and I will be authenticated. Now, if I go on my higher assurance level app, here I'm prompted. Now, you're going to say, oh, password is back again. Now, remember, password is still optional. When OIE first prompts you, it actually doesn't know which authentication method you want to use. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select verify with something else, use FastPass. So now it's going to prompt for my biometric. I'm going to put my biometric. and I have authentication. Now, the next time where you remember that, so let me show you so that you see it is actually not a fluke. So I'm going to sign out. Now we have the organization set up that you have to re-authenticate every time. There is no grace period. So sign up with FastPass, first level of authentication, only with the possession factor type. I get access to my dashboard and to my basic low assurance level app. And if I want to go to my higher assurance app, I'm being prompted for biometric. I put my biometric and I have access to my application. So this is what I wanted to show you and demonstrate for our passwordless experience using FastPass. I'm going to hand it back to Brent to conclude the conversation.
All right, thanks, Dimitri. So as we've seen, FastPass provides a very minimum friction passwordless login experience. It also allows you to enforce phishing-resistant authentication flows with additional security telemetry for higher sensitivity apps. It provides a consistent user experience across all browsers, platforms, and devices. And it provides enhanced visibility of security posture through adding additional device context, including third-party integration for additional device context. Next slide. FastPass also provides some advantages over auth-in, or over web auth-in rather. Specifically, the device context that's available through FastPass, including out-of-the-box device signals such as operating system version, device lock status, disk encryption status, jailbreak status, etc. In addition, you can integrate third-party integrations to provide additional device signals through things like CrowdStrike, Windows Security Center, etc. And you can provide, you can use that, all of that device context is not just used during the authentication flows, it's also logged in the syslog entries for each authentication request. So that information can be used to orchestrate remedial security orchestration workflows based on historical data from your syslogs. Next slide, please. So just to recap what we've covered today, we went from a very simple classic Okta org, and after a brief review of some key OIE concepts, we upgraded our org to OIE via the self-service tooling. We took note of the before and after changes in OIE that you can expect. And then finally, we walked through the process of setting up two different passwordless flows, one using email magic link and one using Okta FastPass. Next slide, please. I do want to reiterate once again, please take a moment to bookmark the links that were posted in the chat window around the Okta Identity Engine Hub on the help site, as well as the discussion group where you can sign up for office hour sessions or post your questions directly there. Those, again, both those links should be posted in the chat window. Next slide, please. And finally, before we leave, please mark your calendars for our next virtual meetup in the series, which will be on August 22nd at 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon Eastern time. Right now, tentatively, the theme of that will be Zero Trust, but we'll have more details on that here in the next week or so. So check that discussion group for more information on that, or check with your Okta account team as well. And with that, on behalf of Dimitri, my colleagues here at Okta and myself, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We do have about 5 minutes left. I see one open question. Can dissociation be done at the user level? I'm not sure if I missed some context there for the question. But if we have any other, well, first of all, I want to thank Rashir and Dan for working feverishly to answer a lot of the questions. I saw a lot of them flying as the webinar was going on. If you have other questions, or if you would like to discuss any of the questions that were addressed here in greater detail, again, your best avenue forward is to visit that discussion group and sign up for office hour sessions. We have one-on-one sessions available, as well as group format sessions as well.
Hey, Brent,
Yes.
can you paste the two links? I don't have access to paste it to the general chat to everybody.
Yep, I will do that right now. One second.
That way everybody has it. I've put in some of the answers, but I just want to make sure.
Actually, it looks like here, let me paste it one more time. It looks like it should still be there. There we go. All right, so those two links should be there. A couple, I guess, recurring questions that I saw was about the availability of the slide deck, as well as the recording of the webinar itself. We will make both the slide deck and the recording available as soon as we can after this session. As far as the specific locations and links for those, best option is to check that discussion group. We'll definitely have a link posted there. The video itself of the webinar should be on our Okta YouTube channel at some point in the near future. All right. So I guess we can kind of quickly go through a couple of the open questions. So we have one question asking if enabling FastPass is done at a global level only. So there's a couple things there. There is enabling it as an authenticator, and then requiring it or requiring specific, I guess, constraints or authenticator types at a policy level. So enabling FastPass is done at a global level. Now, you can, even when that is enabled as an authenticator, you can define specific constraints around specific authentication policies. So you wouldn't necessarily have to use it in every authentication policy for every application, but generally enabling it is done at a global level. And let's see, will there be a lot more hands-on seminars about this at Octane? So I don't know. I don't know specifically what the call for speakers at Octane went out recently. I know that they were reviewing submissions for sessions at Octane now. I don't have the official lineup of what sessions will be there, but I would imagine that there will be a number of hands-on sessions on a lot of these features at Octane. All right. Oh, so sorry, going back to the FastPass question about so the question, I guess, was primarily around the user experience and the ability to start enrolling or registering their devices once you enable it. So you don't, just because you enable FastPass doesn't necessarily require end users to enroll in FastPass. That would be dependent on your authentication policies and what specific requirements you specify there. So you could certainly enable FastPass and allow users who wanted to use it, but not necessarily force everyone to use it. And that's kind of dependent on your specific authentication policies. All right. What versions qualify? So there really are only two platforms. So the question is, what versions qualify for upgrade to OIE? So really, there are really only two. There are really only two platforms. You're either on Classic or OIE. If you're on Classic, you are eligible to upgrade as long as you don't have any blockers that need to be remediated. And then once you remediate those blockers, you would be eligible to upgrade. All right, we're up against the end of the hour here. I see we still have a couple more questions coming in. Again, as noted, please, if you still have questions after today's session, feel free to request membership in that discussion group. You can post your questions directly there, or you can sign up for live office hour sessions to speak in more detail with members of the product acceleration team, and we can help you out with any questions you may have. With that, once again, I guess we're at the end of the hour here. So I want to thank everyone again for joining. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully on the next session as well. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers all.